If you felt that things around the internet, and certainly in and around the Gammonverse, got very, very smug last night in particular, don't be alarmed, because last night lots of Brexiteers were cheering what they are considering to be a massive Brexit victory, that we haven't got in to the Trans-Pacific Partnership yet. We are only at the second to last stage. So don't get me wrong, we are not in there yet, but we are, by the looks of it, on the way to being in that partnership. Now, I've said before that this Pacific trade deal is not going to be a good deal. Despite whatever the Brexiteers say, whatever their claims have been made about the Pacific trade deal, there are lots of concerns in and around joining this deal, which are not going to be good for the UK. Let alone the fact that Brexiteers spent years complaining about how, no, you don't understand, we've got to take our sovereignty back from the UK. But here's the thing, if we do join this Pacific trade deal, we've got to give up our sovereignty to lower our standards. Yes, because most of these countries actually have lower standards than we do. So if we are to take advantage of the Trans-Pacific Partnership deal, then we have to accept lower standards in our country. And as we've said before, the Brexiteers were crowing about, no, you don't understand, we'll maintain our high standards. But joining the Trans-Pacific Partnership basically means we have to give up our sovereignty to lower our standards to be part of this trade bloc. And yet, for years, Brexiteers have made the exact opposite argument that, no, you don't understand, we've got to take back our sovereignty from the EU because their standards are too high. And once again, this is all about trying to fulfill the free market fundamentalist wet dreams of having this libertarian crazy idea. And trust me, us joining this trade deal, it's not going to go down well, I think. Once I think you start to explain to people the realities of this, and we are going to explain the realities of this, because trust me, we've got a piece here that we're going to go through today in the Telegraph, which is basically straight up propaganda for this. I'm not going to lie to you. This is straight up propaganda. This is written by Shaka Shingham. I think that's how his name is. This is the guy, or at least one of the people, is part of the Institute of Economic Affairs. Yes, that very same IEA, the people who were backing Liz Truss to the hilt. So this should be met with extreme skepticism about everything this guy says. And just to balance it out, we are going to go, after we've gone through this, to what the Institute of Directors has to say about their concerns about joining the Trans-Pacific Partnership, because I feel like we've got to at least balance this nonsense that we are about to read out with something real and grounded. And remember, the whole idea of, no, you don't understand, we've got to be and maintain our sovereignty. The second we join this, we have to lower our trade deals, our regulations, a whole ton of stuff. Not because we are voting on this or Parliament gets to decide that. No, we are being told by these 11 other countries, part of this Pacific trade deal, we have to lower our trade standards. And it's not just trade and regulation standards, it's also working regulations as well. So make no mistake, Brexiteers, over the next couple of days, we are going to see lots of articles about this, crowing about how fantastic this trade deal is and how it's a wonderful Brexit victory, finally. But if anything, everything that the Brexiteers have ever complained about being members of the EU and the single market applies directly, even more so, to this Pacific trade deal. So let's go diving into it. But before we do that, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a notation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And of course, as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel. So, off we go down to the Telegraph, down into the dumps. And this is a basic, as I said, this is a basic propaganda piece. This is by Shaka Shingham, and he is one of the people from the Institute of Economic Affairs. So this is straight up propaganda. So the title of this is, like I say, it comes from the Telegraph. It's the title of "The Pacific Trade Deal is a Brexit Victory, Whatever the Doubters Say." Again, the cope, the cope is already coming. Oh no, because they are this is why this was put out, by the way. This is trying to preempt any criticism, or any criticism you hear about us joining this. Yeah, just ignore them. That's why this has been written. So see what he's got to say. So when it was originally proposed that Britain join some of the world's biggest Pacific nations in a trade partnership, there were howls of derision from the consigliere. But it looks like this ascension process is now finally in the home stretch. The UK has been seeking to accede for some time to the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, or the CPTPP. The trade agreement consisting of 11 countries in the Pacific region, including Japan, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, Canada, Mexico, Chile, Vietnam, Malaysia, Peru, and Brunei. Now remember, what's the common factor with all these countries? Oh, that's right, they're all in the Pacific. We are on the other side of the world. Distance in trade matters. And none of those countries are close to us in reality at all. So straight away, the idea that joining this is a benefit. Well, the distance in trade matters. That is still a thing. So it doesn't matter that you sign this trade deal, because distance, unfortunately, still matters. But again, he won't mention that. So ascension to the partnership would be a huge benefit for Brexit Britain. Again, huge. It should certainly be in quotation marks. And would not have been possible inside the European Union. That's completely false. There would have been possibles for all that if we had been inside the European Union. In fact, we probably got a better deal, to be honest, if we had joined as part of the European Union, because multinational trade blocs are the future. And, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or the Pacific Partnership, as we'll just call it, just for simplicity, is based on the European Union and the European Union model. So, since the pact requires that the UK has control over its own regulatory system, bear in mind, we have to give up our own regulatory system in order to join theirs. So that's not true. We would have to leave, again, a lot of European institutions that we are still a part of, especially a lot to do with intellectual property. We would have to leave the European organization regarding that to join this. That will not be good, because that guarantees a whole lot of stuff. And that would, once again, throw completely up in the air of businesses and certainty around that. It's not what businesses in the UK want. They don't want to be part of, the Pacific Partnership. They want to be more and have closer ties with the EU. They're constantly saying that to the government, and yet they're being ignored. So since the pact requires that the UK has control over its own regulatory system, the dynamic alignment of UK regulations with the EU would also not be feasible, except those in the areas where the EU regulation passes the CPTPP muster. So again, pretty much admitting that we have to change our regulations to match the Pacific Partnerships. So what was this all thing about deregulation and that? To do this, we're having to give up our sovereignty to the Pacific Partnership. But you had such problems giving up sovereignty to the EU. Why? What's changed in your arguments about this? So there is regulation of many products, for example, and that have been challenged by other countries in the World Trade Organization, where the WTO cases have been lost. Since the Pacific deal requires more liberalization in those areas than the WTO, the so-called WTO plus, the UK would not be able to simply follow EU rules, as this would bring into conflict with its new trade partners. So you're telling us we have to lower our regulations. Like this is what he's saying. By saying that, he is outwardly just said we have to lower our regulations. And remember, Brexiteers were saying, "Oh, doesn't matter. We've already got really high regulations. We're not gonna lower these regulations." So, ascension would be a huge triumph for UK negotiators and the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State for Business and International Trade in particular. It would mark the point at which Brexit could not be reversed. Interesting you admit that as well. But there you go. And bear in mind, remember, if we could actually do reverse Brexit, that's not impossible. The idea that once we join it, Brexit is irreversible is again completely false, because here's the thing. We could leave the Pacific Partnership because compared to the EU, there's no, formal sort of leaving process as there is within the EU, and we could easily sort of transition back into the EU. So this whole thing, once we do it, Brexit is just irreversible. Once again, no. Brexit is always and will remain completely reversible, no matter how many obstacles people like this guy insist that there are to sort of rejoining the EU. It's always infinitely reversible. Like I say, we could just pass one bill called an EU alignment bill and do it in one. This is what people forget, because we did this before. People forget that we've done this before. And I keep on reminding people, we did this before, we can do so again. So, but there are more important reasons why this is such an important global event that goes beyond what the narrow economic benefits for the UK. What? Why? Oh. So, for the first time, a major G7 country has been chosen to accede to the regional grouping, not because it is part of that region, but rather because the agreement represents the most advanced and deeply liberalizing trade agreement based on mutual recognition, equivalence, and adequacy. But that's not true. The EU goes deeper than and bear in mind, those countries still get to choose their own regulation. This is not the single market. This is not a replacement for the single market. Japan can still dictate its own trade regulations, even with being within that bloc. So this is not the single market. So increasingly, countries are viewing the Pacific Partnership as an alternative, liberalizing framework to the WTO. Interesting that you're saying that, considering how many years ago, for years, we have seen Brexiteers, extol the virtues of the WTO, which maximizes regulatory competition. Again, please explain to the people what regulatory competition is and how we would have to lower those regulations that a lot of people prize very, very highly. It is also a geoeconomic and geopolitical grouping. No, it's not. It's not It certainly is economic, but it is not political. Let's get that out of the way first of all. This is no way political, and if it is, political as you claim, then why did you have such problems being in the EU? Because that was another complaint of the Brexiteers against the EU for years that they had. So the grouping, which has a major impact on the way that global trade agreements work, not really, because again, it's not a global grouping. That the Pacific Partnership does not really act as one. They all act as individual countries. Again, this is no EU. This is no single market, but they're trying to sort of pitch it as this is what we're joining. It's not. It's nothing like that whatsoever. Now the Pacific Partnership is not just a regional agreement. It becomes a real challenge to the atrophied WTO system and will hopefully encourage that system to wake up. The UK has now made a choice about whether it wants a world of regulatory harmonization or one regulatory of competition. Competition is the most powerful force known to man to create wealth and increase productivity and economic growth. Again, this whole thing about that libertarians have about competition. Oh my god, competition, competition, competition. Competition, yes, is good, but competition just does not go away because you bring in regulations. Like, there is still competition. And the thing is, if you are a bigger company, as we've seen many, many times, there are lots of examples of bigger companies buying out smaller companies and destroying that competition. Eh, You know, and the other thing is, we now this is actually really dangerous because we've talked about Labour wanting to create a sovereign wealth fund to be able to actually invest in sort of UK green markets and green energy. If we join this, then Labour cannot do that because the Pacific Partnership will actively um, go against us in doing that. And again, what's all this about you guys saying about how we can have sovereignty, where here is an organization that says, no, you cannot make your own rules and laws if you want to do something economically. I thought that was a bad thing. But here you are extolling the virtues of this Pacific Partnership. So the Pacific Partnership is also a bulwark against the Chinese market distortions that are damaging the world and provides a platform where novel approaches to these anti-competitive market distortions can be agreed upon by large like-minded groupings. Oh, you mean like the EU? So the Pacific Partnership plus the UK has the equivalent economic weight to the EU 28 minus the UK. No, no, it doesn't. There's there's so many differences to this. There's no real thing saying that the Pacific Partnership is the equal to the EU 28. And bear in mind, this is all based on projections that these libertarians love to use. That in 10 years' time, like most of the middle class in the entire world is going to be living in the Pacific Partnership region. And remember, we are not a manufacturer. We are a service sector economy. How is that possible under that? But there you go. So if this accelerates the possibility of the US rejoining the Pacific Partnership after it pulled out under Donald Trump, then it would also become a grouping that spans half the global economy. Um, Absolutely not. The Pacific Partnership is still not very likely that the US will rejoin. It is still not likely that the US will rejoin. It is still seen for what it really is, a very, very, very toxic economic grouping that has a lot of deregulationary aspects and a grouping that can punish any country that might want to raise its regulations or even labor standards. And this is something we've really got to start. I think really start sounding the alarm bells about, and really, really start pushing a campaign against. I think the Pacific Partnership. I think this is really where we have to start really pushing for. So there is a battle for the world's operating system, and the UK ascension would make it more likely that those who believe in competition on the merits and systems that interoperate on the basis of mutual recognition will win it. Yeah, again, this is the whole idea that libertarianism and free market economics is going to work. Bear in mind, if you look at some of these countries, it actually inside the Pacific Partnership, there are a lot of of campaigns against it. And it's not a guarantee that the Pacific Partnership may even survive. We'll see if it will, but the idea that it will survive in its current form and not have very significant changes is very, very doubtful. So no doubt many will focus narrowly on the static economic modeling regarding the impact of the Pacific Partnership ascension on the UK economy in the short term. this is not just a short term of that economic modeling. This is long term economic. Again, I'm noticing he's ignoring um, the long term. He's to say, oh yeah, short term it's going to be static. No, long term as well. The projections also are not good because why? Ask every single economist why those economic modelings are always very static about Pacific Partnerships ascensions. It's because we are halfway around the world. We are not in the Pacific. That is why we are so far out of it. Every single economist says that if the UK actually wants to get any proper economic benefit, we would actually have to convince those countries those countries in the Pacific Partnerships to change their modelings and their economic stuff to actually benefit our economy. But they're not going to do that for one country that's halfway around the world. It has no economic benefit for them. Sure, we're part of this, potentially part of this grouping now, but then so what? It's not really this massive economic benefit that Brexiteers and the free market fundamentalists have been making out that this win would be. But we're going to see, I can guarantee you, probably today, tomorrow, even over the weekend, probably into next week as well, we are going to see a load of articles like this praising the Pacific Partnership as this wonderful thing. And we're going to have to probably cover them all just to make sure it's burned into people's brains that this Pacific Partnership Agreement is really not good. It is not comparative to the EU. It is not the single market. It does not operate the same way. And as we said at the beginning, if you are a Brexiteer and you are all about reclaiming sovereignty, why are you okay then suddenly giving sovereignty to Pacific Partnership, which will actively lower our regulations? Now, I thought we were all about sovereignty all of a sudden, but suddenly when it comes to the Pacific Partnership, here you go, take all the sovereignty. What? What? So, so the UK's economy in the short term, or the impact of the UK's ascension on its defensive interests. But this is also to miss the wider point about the geopolitical significance of this event. Again, it's not massive. Again, you're making out this as a massive turning point of the world economy. It certainly doesn't seem that way. You're not giving why it's such a geopolitical event of significance. Our allies will certainly pick up on this, even if we don't. They will notice that the UK is able to lead, and execute on smart global trade strategies. they, they haven't so far. Again, you certainly please cite your evidence that why this is a smart global trade strategy. It would show that the UK understands its new role in the world and is prepared to act on it. Again, what role are we taking? The idea that, once again, promoting this idea that the UK is this world leader on the world stage is not true. It has always been the case that trade policy is part of your wider foreign policy, not merely an acceleration of narrow commercial interest or whatever business tell you that they want. What about domestic policy then? Because you are saying that we should sacrifice all domestic policy for the altar of foreign policy, which again is the complete opposite of what Brexit was meant to be about. So the wider foreign policy dimensions are even more significant now, with the war on the European continent and with the Chinese market manipulation causing severe economic disruptions all over the world. This is why the UK ascension is so important, and we are hopeful that the good news will emerge soon. And again, Shaka Sherman, again, a former trade advisor to the UK Secretary for State for International Trade, see the missing part that should be in there, Liz Truss. Do you really think that this is a good idea, considering he's also part of the Institute of Economic Affairs? And remember, they were the big ones backing Liz Truss. Do you really trust that this is a good idea? So now, just to widen this out, we are now going to go to, here we are, the Institute of Directors. And for those of you who don't know who the Institute of Directors are, they are probably one of the biggest influential groups of business people in the UK. Like next to the Chamber of Commerce, this is massive. This is a massive grouping of business like interests in the UK. It's very powerful, very influential. So they've done their own analysis on this as well, and they've talked about, well, yeah, there are opportunities to sort of be had, but and this is where we have to cover the but, because none in the reality of the concerns that they do are really that positive. And again, they talk about, you heard about, yeah, you just ignore that, that short-term stagnation. Again, it's not just short-term, it's long-term as well, because again, there is no benefit to joining a trade grouping of blocks that is halfway around the world. It's pointless, because those countries would then have to change their own sort of rules and regulations to basically suit us. What's the chance of them doing that? So this is what they had to say about their concerns over the Pacific Partnership. So the Pacific Partnership has expressed that the UK should fully accept and commit to complying with the existing rules of the agreement. And this goes all about regulations, the lowering of our standards, workers' rights and regulations. So they are insisting we should comply with their rules. Now, remember, I want to remind you again, Brexiteers had a massive problem with accepting the EU's rules and regulations. And it was, we are not a sovereign country because we accept those EU rules and regulations. But here we have the Pacific Partnership saying, okay, you've got to agree to all this. Where is suddenly all the arguments in and around sovereignty? All of a sudden, where are they gone? Where are all these Brexiteers complaining about how we are giving up our sovereignty to the Pacific Partnership? Oh, that's right, they're not there. Because this is part of the wider, as we always said, Brexit was always a free market fundamentalist project for crazy ideas that you saw under Liz Truss that pretty much almost crashed the economy, almost destroyed the UK pension market. And now they want us to join this, quote, liberalizing group of nations, which would mean accepting lower food, lower health, all kinds of lower standards, which the UK public would not accept. This is why there probably is not going to be a vote on the Pacific Partnership. And this is why there needs to be a massive campaign starting to push against joining the Pacific Partnership. We have to start campaigning about this, because joining this is not going to be good for the UK. It's not good economically. It is not going to be good domestically. It's not going to be good for us. And the thing is, all the complaints that Brexiteers had about the EU apply exactly the same to the Pacific Partnership. So, therefore, since the UK government cannot negotiate terms, so instantly, we cannot negotiate. There is no negotiation. You accept the rules. There is no negotiations. Once again, where are all the Brexiteers complaining about the loss of sovereignty? So the question is, what will the UK have to sacrifice in order to qualify? And that is what should be making the news. We will have to sacrifice these standards and regulations, which we want. The UK public constantly says we want high standards in all these areas, in regulations and everything. And yet we are going to have to sacrifice all that for joining this grouping. So, for example, there have been concerns raised that joining the Pacific Partnership will lead to the lowering of food standards, and it will lead, it's not concerns raised, it will lead to the lowering of food standards. Central to this is that if we continue to align with the EU on sanitary and phytosanitary measures, which, bear in mind, the EU withdrawal agreement says we have to sign up to those. Like we in order to trade with the EU, we have to continue with those measures, which, by the way, blows the Windsor framework out of being applied, I think, which raises whole new standards and whole new questions. You can see just how crazy joining this actually is. And there are measures that would be a discrepancy into SPS measures between the UK and the Pacific Partnership members. UK farmers have also emphasized the impact of signing these trade deals with countries who are big exporters of agriculture would have on the UK industry. So once again, British farmers being thrown under the bus because of Brexit. Another significant concern is around intellectual property, or IP, and the need to protect our standards. The IP contributes very much significantly to UK innovation and productivity. Currently, the UK is a member of the European Patent Convention, which supports particularly creative industries, but also research, tech, and innovative businesses. These are inconsistencies between the Pacific Partnership rules and IP and the EPC, which, if the UK had to cede membership to the EPC, this would impact growth of British businesses. So instantly, there is massive negative effects to joining this. This is not a positive thing to join. We should not be joining the Pacific Partnership. And certainly, if you're a Brexiteer, if you were campaigning against all this, everything you were complaining about being in the EU, you should be complaining against this. And I think we've got to get on this, and I think we've got to start campaigning against this. We have to start campaigning against this now and stop this in its tracks. We have to get Labour to say, we will not join the Pacific Partnership. This is a bad idea. This does not represent the wills and what most people in the UK actually want. And it will damage British businesses. It will be bad for our economy. It is just not a good idea. But meanwhile, we could join the EU and their single market, because overwhelmingly seems people want to join that. That seems to be the big, at least, bonus for the idea on that. Because if joining this is suddenly such a good idea, then how about the EU and their single market and their customs union? Because all the arguments that they make now about joining the Pacific Partnership, not only would we get actual economic benefits from rejoining the single market and sort of the EU, they would apply doubly so to joining the EU, whereas they don't apply to the Pacific Partnership. The Pacific Partnership is just this pie-in-the-sky idea that Brexiteers had because, oh, it looks good. So where were we? So, post-Brexit perspective. So since we've left the EU, the government has been focusing on their trade reorientation strategy. As a competitive trading nation, it is vital that the UK signs trade deals in order to restore our international reputation since Brexit. Agreements have already been signed and been concluded in quick succession and do not necessarily have a significant impact on our economy. Our deal with New Zealand, for example, is estimated to have negligible impact on UK GDP. I want to remind people that New Zealand trade deal that all the Brexiteers were raving about has negative impact on our GDP. So while flying the flag for, quote, global Britain is good for our post-Brexit standing, complete reorientation is not going to solve the very real problem that businesses currently face, namely that they have many more trade-related challenges than they did 6 years ago. And from our surveys of directors, they have told us that the EU-UK relationship is a priority issue for the government, and it needs to address it in order to support businesses. So most UK businesses want a UK-EU relationship, not a Pacific Partnership relationship. We've said this time and time and time again. Businesses want closer ties with the EU. And that was made explicitly clear because remember, as Daniel Hannan said, only a fool would leave the single market customs union. So, UK companies still rely on the long established links they have with EU markets, which are directly on our doorstep and with whom they have closer historical ties. The Indo-Pacific strategy will open up important opportunities for UK businesses, but the government must not forfeit the significance of our relationship with the EU in order to do so. So that is what UK businesses currently say. Do not sacrifice our relations, our business and trade relations, which are far more important, just to sign something, a Pacific trade deal, which has little to no impact on us. And while there are opportunities, they are nowhere near the opportunities and business advantages and relationships that already exist within the EU. Because guess what? Businesses can't just start going off to Indonesia, to Malaysia, to all these new 11 countries that we're suddenly part of. Because they'll be like, who are you? What do you have? What can you offer us? We are not a manufacturing country. We are a service-based economy. Remember, 80% of our businesses are based in that. That is what our economy is based on. Services. We are a service-based economy. 80% of our business infrastructure goes to small, medium enterprises. This is companies with less than 200 employees. They all benefit far, far, far more from EU single market membership and close relationships with the EU rather than they ever would with the Pacific Partnership. That's just the general economic truth. And yet it is something that Brexiteers still can't seem to get over their head around. Yet over the next couple of days, we are going to see articles like we just saw there. And bear in mind, that is a pure propaganda puff piece. That does not raise, as was there, the reality that we would have to sacrifice a ton of rules and regulations because there is no negotiations. I I want to make that very clear. The Pacific Partnership has said no negotiations. You accept the terms or you're not in. How many people in upcoming articles are going to be honest about that? I guarantee you they're not going to be a lot. So anyway, thank you. Like I say, it's been a long video today, but I think quite rightly so. Like I say, I think we need to really, really get out ahead of this and start saying to people, look, this whole Pacific Partnership trade deal is not a good idea. It is not a replacement to the EU. It is not a replacement to the single market. We would have to accept lower standards, lower food regulations on a whole swathe of different things. And it would also mean having to accept tons and tons of cheap imports for agriculture and all kinds of different stuff, which would destroy not only potential British manufacturing, which again, Brexiteers cared about extremely at one point, but now don't seem to care about, and also British farmers would suffer massively because of it as well. And there you have, once again, the realities of Brexit laid bare. Brexit was not a good idea. It was never a good idea. Even businesses are like, hey, do not sacrifice our EU relationships for this, because our EU relationships are far more important to us than those of the Pacific Partnership. And that comes from the Institute of Economic Directors. from the Institute of Directors, shall we say. One of the most important and influential groups in the UK when it comes to business interests. And when they're saying that, you know you should sit up and pay attention. So, as always, thank you very much for joining me today. Like I said, I know it's been a long one, but I think sort of it justifies being a bit of a long one today. But as always, thank you very much for joining us today. And as always, thank you very much. And of course, we'll see you all next time.